This morning we're going to be taking a tour of utopian communes in the United States. There are many of these things, and we're going to be touring some of them, and we don't have much time. While we're focusing on this slide, we're grateful to the Boonshoff School of Medicine, Wright State University, that provides CME credit for these events. And while we're looking at this slide, focus on this name. This was Oscar Boonshoff, and this is the Boonshoff School of Medicine. This is the Boonshoff Center for Jewish Studies in Dayton. This is the Boonshoff Museum of Natural History. This is the Boonshoff Center for Medical Sciences. Now, a few years ago, when my family and I would eat at this hometown buffet, I would frequently spot Oscar Boonshoff at one of the tables. And I'm quite sure that I was the only one other than the manager who recognized him. He could have afforded to have eaten anywhere he wanted to, but instead he chose to conserve his cash and spend it so that the rest of us could enjoy the fruits of his labors. This is my friend Dr. Benjamin Schuster. He is a cardiologist, and this is the Schuster Center for Performing Arts, where I enjoy hearing wonderful concerts. And this is the Schuster Heart Center. This is the second richest man in the world, Warren Buffett. And when I recently went to Omaha, I was told that he frequently gives out hundreds of scholarships to needy young students. I was also told by a fellow who was a neighbor of his, lived about 2 or 3 blocks away, that he lives in a very modest house, $800,000 or $1 million, for a man of his economic stature. Now, what is in common with all of these 3 men? Well, the thing that we need to consider is if they had lived in utopian communes, they never would have had all of these things to disperse for the rest of us to enjoy. Now, when we talk about these things, a lot of times people will be jealous of maybe their wealth. They have more than we do. And I really don't care, because I appreciate what these people have done. I like the fact that I can go and enjoy wonderful concerts in places that have been contributed, made possible by some of these people. I like the idea that Warren Buffett is helping people in the community. I like the idea that we have all increased our standard of living because of them. When we talk about utopian communes, we also talk about that concept of the common good or the greater good. And after considering this, I have decided that that is a very valid proposition. I agree that the common good or the greater good is something that we all should go for. If we can make one person happy, 2 or 3 people happy rather than 1, or 10 people or 100 people rather than 1, we should go for it. And here we have whole communities, whole countries that are benefiting from the largesse of these individuals who obviously have a lot more than I do, but it increases, it raises all of our standards of living. Now, one thing I disagree with Warren Buffett, and I disagree violently, is the fact that he proposes taxing, the government taxing people like himself. And I violently disagree with that because, for one reason, the United States Constitution is bound to uphold and respect private property. But the major reason is that these funds are much, much better dispersed by a person like him or a person like Oscar Boonshoff than they are by the federal government. Governments of any kind are notoriously poor. They're abysmal in dispersing funds. And not only that, when a person receives a grant or a scholarship, they're grateful to someone like this. If they get it from the government, they demand it, they expect it, and they riot if they don't get it. The word utopia comes from Thomas More, who published this book, Utopia, in 1516. And it comes from the Latin utopia, a place that does not exist, or no place. And this is because it goes against the grain of human nature. So it's impossible to have utopia in this world. Now we're going to be looking at several times. We're going to take a quick tour. Many of these utopian communes had religious backgrounds. Now, we're not going to be discussing the merits or lack thereof of some of these religions. We're going to be quickly going, and that's not our purpose here. But these things exist in all of our backgrounds, in our geographic backgrounds as well as our theologic backgrounds. And in order not to pick on anybody, I am going to begin this in my own geographic background, and I'm going to end on my own theologic background. And if I traverse yours in the process, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. Some of these religious groups were persecuted in Europe and came to this country, and they chose to live communally. Some of them were atheistic humanists, and they just had a social preference for living together, and that's still the case. Some of them were celibate, some of them were free love communities, some of them had normal marriage relationships. Some of them claimed to have been run by God himself and considered to be theistic. Others had a central figure or figures that ran the organization. Others were anarchist, didn't have any laws, didn't have anybody centrally running it, and these are probably the most interesting to me. Some of these entities hail back to Acts 2 and Acts 4 in the Bible, where they claim that the early Christian church lived communally and all of that. Well, that's just simply not true, because in Acts 2 and Acts 4, we're going to skip Acts 2, but here we can read very quickly, from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. Well, is this utopian communism? Absolutely not. This is the same as people selling something they have or giving something of their own, and as a free will offering, as a donation, as a contribution, as a tithe. It's no different than churches today. But they weren't living together. They weren't sharing each other's fruits of their labors alike or anything of that sort. This is a complete misrepresentation. Now, we're going to be using the F word a lot in this talk. This is intended for mature audiences only, and F stands for failure, because failure is universal. Why do they fail? Well, in my opinion, one of the minor reasons why they fail is that many of them destroy the family unit. But even those that don't destroy the family unit fail as well. So there's a major cause, and that major cause is that there are too many sinecures rolling about. Well, what's a sinecure? The Latin for sine is without, and the Latin for cura is care. So it's without care. It's someone who gets paid for not having any care, somebody who gets money for not doing anything. And I think this is an absolute fantastic name for a managed care organization, because you could call it without care. And if somebody should misinterpret that and say it's without cure, that's fine too. What are some of the examples of sinecurism? Well, on the consumer side, we have a patient that I recently saw who actually went through a divorce because her attorney suggested it so she could get on disability. I mean, this kind of thing is happening. I'm seeing people get on disability for the strangest reasons, and a lady told me this the other day. On the provider side, and I know we don't like that word provider, but I recently talked to an orthopedic resident who said, I think I'm going to get an MBA degree so I can then work for an HMO and so I can tell other doctors how to do. Well, there are, that's getting paid for not doing anything. Even our medical societies are getting involved in this. And here is an advertisement that was sent to physicians for them to attend a meeting or an event to enhance practice services and maximize the bottom line using non-physician practitioners. So what you do, because of decreasing reimbursement and collections, we're supposed to go out and we're supposed to hire these non-physicians to take care of our patients, to do the job we're supposed to do and get paid for it, and of course pay them less for it, so we sit back and just supervise and do nothing. This is sinecurism. This leads me to the Christman utopian postulate number 1, that within the context of a free market, a utopian communal experiment is sooner or later doomed to extinction. Why? Well, the people who are inside the fence in the communes, there's too many sinecurism around. There are too many sinecures around. The grass does not grow as well. They're lazy, they don't do much. And on the other side of the fence, however, where the free market is, the grass is green. And so they figure out a way sooner or later. They see that the grass is green on the other side, and they will figure out a way to get over to that side, whatever they have to do, and that's what happens. This is my geographic backyard, And this is where we're starting. I live in Dayton, Ohio. And to clarify my theologic background as well, I was born in a wonderful Seventh-day Adventist home, but I reject Seventh-day Adventist theology, and today I consider myself merely to be a Christian with a capital C. But this is where we're starting our tour, in my geographic backyard in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio. And exactly 15.6 miles south, we come to Union Village, which was started in 1805, lasted around a century, and this is a Shaker community. There's not much left there today except for a retirement center. Some of the buildings, original buildings, are still there. And exactly 10 miles north of my backyard is another one, the Watervliet Shaker community, named after the famous Watervliet community in New York. And this one also lasted about a century, but there's nothing left there, just vacant land. Here's one you can actually tour, and this is in Kentucky, Pleasant Hill. And you can go through and you can tour the various buildings. And they had a very unique lifestyle. They shared everything. The people who came here had to, if they were married, they had to dissolve their marriages. If they had children, it was the community that had to raise their children. The parents could not have attachments to them anymore. And their property was gone. It went to the society. So if they changed their minds, they were in tough shape. And here's another Shaker community in South Union, Kentucky. You can also tour this one today. The husbands and wives couldn't even talk to each other. They couldn't even eat together. So when they came to eat, the men came at one time, and the women would come another time, and they couldn't even talk to each other except for certain prearranged times where men and women in the community could talk to each other. Well, here's another, this is one of the earliest ones, Mount Lebanon, New York. And you can't tour this one because today it is occupied by the Sufi Muslims. Yeah, but you can still see the buildings there. Some of them are in a renovated state. Some of them are in a terrible state of disrepair, barely standing. Here's one you can tour in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And this is a Shaker community that you can tour as well. Well, there are about 27 Shaker communities altogether, mostly in the eastern part of the United States. And these probably had an estimated 60 or 70,000 people come through them at one time or another before they collapsed. There's actually one that's still standing, the only one in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, where there are 2, maybe 3 Medicare-aged Shakers still alive. But the handwriting is on the wall, and they've all failed, essentially. Here's a list of them. Many of them lasted around a century, and that was it. What happened is Mother Ann Lee in 1774 came to this country. She had been in England, and she had married Abraham Stanley. And she had had 4 young children very early in life. She lost them all, unfortunately, and she had an intense dislike for sex. So she decided, she actually had a revelation. God gave her a revelation that sex was evil, was bad. So she and all of her followers decided to give it up. And it wasn't hard for her, but it was hard for her husband, because when they came to the United States, he brought a prostitute home with him one day, and that was the end of that marriage. Of course, it was the end of all the marriages for them, for the Shakers that followed. But she had also some other strange ideas. She thought that she was the female equivalent of Christ and a few other things. But they realized when they came to this country that their sect was doomed because of celibacy. So they heard in 1801 that in Kentucky, this place called Cane Ridge, Kentucky, in 1801 had a huge revival, 15 or 20,000 people, thanks to Barton Stone and another fellow, Alexander Campbell. And so they decided these people were ripe for conversion. So they came to Kentucky, and they came to Ohio and Indiana, and they certainly converted a lot of people to their way of life. And Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell were not utopians by any stretch, but you can still visit their establishment in Kentucky. This was a Campbellite pastor. He was also a Baptist pastor, and Sidney Rigdon is his name. And he did become a utopian later, and he also actually became a Mormon. And we'll catch up with him later. This is a utopian community that, well, never got started. It failed before it actually got started in Ludlow, Kentucky. But if we go down the Ohio River, not too far from where I live, there's a place that's actually called Utopia. This was started as a Fourierist community in 1844, and it promptly failed. And then they sold the place to a spiritualist, John Waddles. Now, they had built their buildings right on the banks of the Ohio River, and the Ohio River flooded a couple years in 1847 and washed them all away. A lot of them died, and those that survived didn't want to stay around anymore. There isn't a whole lot in Utopia today, and there wasn't a whole lot back then either. So this is not exactly what Thomas More envisioned as Utopia. This is Josiah Warren. He was an industrialist. He was the one who started Utopia. And when that one failed, he went on to other places. He actually started one in Long Island, a free love community there. Yellow Springs is 25 miles north of my backyard. This utopian community was started in 1825 by followers of Robert Dale Owen, and it promptly failed within a year or two. But 3 decades later, Mary Gove Nichols and her husband came. This is actually going to be her second husband because she had some terrible things to say about marriage, and so she, I don't know if they actually got married or not, but ultimately these two actually ended up in Josiah Warren's free love community out there in Long Island. But they came to Yellow Springs first, and they started an outfit called Pneumonia, and that failed within a year. And he was interested in the water cure, and he wrote books on it. And here's another fellow who wrote about the water cure. He started an establishment in Chillicothe, Ohio, and his promptly failed as well in the 1850s. In West Liberty, Ohio is Prairie View, which started in 1844, and that failed. Now we come to Charles Fourier. There are 3 names, 3 French men who you need to know about utopianism. Charles Fourier is one of them. Etienne Cabet is another. And Henry de Saint-Simon is another. And along with these 3, you could also lump in the Scottish businessman and industrialist Robert Dale Owen. These people were very, very sincere and dedicated utopians, but they were basically humanists and atheists. They did not really have any religious interest at all. And interestingly enough, as they all failed, Karl Marx learned a lot about these guys. And he derisively called their brand of socialism utopian socialism, as contrasted to his own scientific utopianism, or socialism. Now, Karl Marx used socialism and communism interchangeably. Now, what is the difference between utopian socialism and scientific socialism? There's only one difference, and that is forced revolution, government takeover, forced takeover of the free market system. That is the only difference. So, wait a minute, what is he saying? Karl Marx never heard of the Christman utopian postulate, but here he is confirming it. He's saying that you can't have them both functioning at the same time. You have to have a revolution to get rid of the free market if you're going to have one of these things survive. And he was absolutely right. It's too bad he had to actually try it. Anyway, Fourier lost his father's inheritance during the French Revolution, and then he even lost his mother's inheritance after she died. And he left, trying to struggle around, and he developed a lot of notions of how these utopian communes should function. And he even put advertisements in papers advertising that he wanted a benefactor, somebody to help him get one of these things started. He said he would be home at such and such a time so one of these people could visit him, and nobody ever came. What his idea was is he developed the idea of a phalanx. And within a phalanx was about 5,000 acres. Within the phalanx is the phalanx steer, where people would live. Now, he developed the notion that there were 810 different types of personalities. And so therefore, there would be 620 ideal occupants of one of these phalanx steers. Not only that, these should exist all over the country and all over the world, and exactly 2,985,984 of these should be all over the world, and they should be under the direction of an omniarch in Constantinople. Well, he didn't find many takers for his idea, except one American who came to study at his feet, Albert Brisbane. And Albert Brisbane subsequently came back to the United States and published this book, The Social Destiny of Man. And he got the attention of Horace Greeley, and they publicized the idea, and lo and behold, about 60 or 70 of these things sprouted up all over the country, all these Fourierist communities. Practically all of them only survived a year or two. They were utter failures. The longest-lasting one was in Colts Neck Township, New Jersey. And here's the North American phalanx. It actually made it for 12 years. Those after the dissolution of it, or just before it, actually went on. These diehard colonists went on to Raritan Bay, New Jersey, where they started their own commune, which lasted about 6 years. And that one failed as well. This is all you can see of it there. This is in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Here we come to Viktor Prosper Considerant. He was the only one who actually started a Fourier's community before Fourier died in 1837. He started one in France, and it failed, of course. Now, his middle name is Prosper. Wow, what a misnomer. Nothing he did prospered. I don't know why his parents wanted to call him that, but I guess you wouldn't want to call your kid failure unless you knew he was going to be a utopian. But anyway, after all of these Fourierist communes expired and died in the 1840s and early 1850s, he decided, of course, he was going to go into exile. And so he decided he wanted to start one of his own in the new country in the United States. So he came over here in 1855 with some of his diehard adherents. And he goes up to Dallas, and he develops this utopian commune in 1855 called La Réunion. And this is what was left of La Réunion about 4 years later. It completely failed. Today in Dallas, there's a prominent landmark called the Réunion Tower, which is named after La Réunion, the failed concept. Here is George Ripley, who was a transcendentalist. He was a Unitarian minister, and he wanted to try his hands at one of these communes along with his transcendentalist friends, and Nathaniel Hawthorne was part of it for a while. They started Brook Farm in the present-day Boston, and it survived for 6 years. And they actually converted this thing to a Fourier's community during the time in order to keep it going. But that, I think, was probably more the death knell. Here is Fruitlands nearby in Harvard, Massachusetts. And this was a commune that was started by Charles Lane and Bronson Alcott. Bronson Alcott was also a transcendentalist. They were both mystics. They had actually both been part of a utopian commune in England before they came here, and they were going to try it again. Well, these guys were vegetarians, and they were vegans. They wouldn't even use animals for anything. They wouldn't wear leather shoes. They wouldn't use woolens. These people were really, really strict and severe, and it's a wonder that they survived 7.5 months. They started in June of 1843, and that was gone by January 15 of 1844. Probably that better winter in Boston did them in. Interesting place you can visit today. In one of the buildings there, you can find a chart that looks like this. And William Miller went around. He was a Baptist minister. He went around in the 1820s and 30s and 40s, preaching that Jesus was going to come, October 22 of 1844. And, of course, that was known as the Great Disappointment. And this is William Miller. And he was not a utopian at all, but many of his followers were, and Seventh-day Adventists grew out of this movement, the Great Disappointment, in William Miller's prediction. And there's never been any step by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I just want to make that clear because some of the Seventh-day Adventists have started utopian communities, but it has never been something that the church has delved into at all. Here at Fruitlands, you can see a number of people who were involved in the commune. Here's a nudist, actually. I don't know how well that worked in January of 1844. Maybe that's why they decided to leave. I don't know. Here's Thoreau's desk. You can see it there today. I always like to see what these people were reading. And here in the library there is Smith's Wealth of Nations. It's a real shame that Bronson Alcott didn't bother to read that before he got started in this project. Now, here is one of the greatest concert violinists ever to live. His name is Ole Bull. He was a Norwegian. He traveled around the world with his Guarneri del Gesù violin, which is worth millions today. And he made a truckload of money, and he decided he wanted to start a commune in northern Pennsylvania. So in 1852, he went to this place, which he named Oleona, along with three other villages that he started. And lo and behold, a year later, there wasn't anything left. There still isn't anything there. You can see a house here and there. But he is the only concert violinist to actually have a state park named after him. He lost a truckload of money, too, so he had to go back on the concert tour with his violin and regain it. About 3 hours east of me in Ohio is Zoar, which in 1817 was formed by separatists that were under the direction of Joseph Baumler. And they were being persecuted in the old country. They were followers of Lutheran pietists, Jacob Boehm and others. And you can actually visit this place today. They actually survived until 1898. They have gardens there today, and you can actually visit the place. It's quite interesting. You go a little farther north of there, and you get to Kirtland, Ohio, and you find the Kirtland Temple that was built by the Mormons and Joseph Smith and his followers. This is a lovely temple that you can tour today. Across the street is Sidney Rigdon's house. Well, Sidney Rigdon actually got involved with Utopianism. He heard a lecture that was given by Robert Dale Owen in Cincinnati in the 1820s. And he was attracted by the idea, and also was this guy, Isaac Morley. And so they together started this Utopian commune in 1829, and it promptly failed in 1830. Here's a picture of Morley's very mediocre violin. I'm sorry, I have a pathologic interest in violins. This is the commune that they started there in Kirtland. And after they were converted to Mormonism, because they started this before they became Mormons, but the actual conversion process was due to the influence of Parley Pratt, who was a very early Mormon, and he was a member of Sidney Rigdon's church. And he became a Mormon and converted his preacher and Morley as well. And Parley Pratt actually went on to be a great polygamist, and many descendants, actually 2 of his descendants are running for the U.S. presidency today. At any rate, we'll go on, and Parley Pratt went on to be a great Mormon as well, but all of these 3 men did. And Mormonism actually started and delved into utopian communism to a great extent. They developed the United Order, and this was a concept through which someone would bring all of their goods and deposit it into the church, and then the church would give some of it back, maybe all of it, as stewards, but then whatever excess was drained off or they didn't need, then that would go back to the church as well. This was pure utopian communism, but they found that it didn't work. Not only did Joseph Smith try it, but also Brigham Young tried it, and every time it failed, they finally gave up on the process. Here in Kirtland, Ohio, at the temple, in the 1980s, was a messianic figure by the name of Jeffery Lundgren. And he actually developed quite a few followers, and they worked, they had outside jobs, but they gave him all the money, and he was their messiah, so to speak. And he doled out their basic needs and necessities. Sadly enough, he had the idea that all of the women in the community belonged to him, whether they were married or not, and he actually murdered 5 of his followers, and for that he was actually executed by the state of Ohio a few years ago. Here is a book that was given away at last year's Salt Lake City meeting. This is a book that was written by Cleon Skousen, who, I don't know if some of you read it or not, but he styles himself as a conservative and as an anti-communist. And here's a picture of Cleon Skousen. He spent a lifetime in law enforcement, and he was an attorney. Listed among his influences, major influences, is Carroll Quigley, the same guy who influenced Bill Clinton. I don't know how many conservatives claim Carroll Quigley as their mentor. I don't know how many conservatives started a utopian commune, which he did. Meadowview, Utah, was started in the mid-1980s, and it failed around 1993. And he was, to a large extent, responsible for having started that. The Mormons today have a schizophrenic attitude toward the United Order. They claim, many of them, to be against communism, but on the other hand, they also try to draw distinctions between the United Order. Here's Marion Romney, who was of the quorum of 12 apostles of the LDS Church, and he was trying to draw a distinction between the two, which in fact there is none. You know, both are strictly pure communism. He quoted from the Doctrine and Covenants of Joseph Smith to no avail. He might have changed his mind in 1973, however, when he said, "I think the United Order will be the last principle of the gospel we will learn to live, and that doing so will bring in the millennium." So apparently he's still looking forward to the United Order and communism. This guy is Peter Armstrong, and he was a follower of William Miller, greatly disappointed. And in 1850, he and his followers went to a place in northern Pennsylvania called Celestia, Pennsylvania. And you know you're getting close to these places when you see signs that say World's End. And here is Celestia, and there's nothing there anymore. It's just, there's nothing at all. Here is Father Divine. Father Divine was active in the 1920s and 1930s. And here's Mother Divine. They were supposed to be celibate. I don't know, their followers certainly were supposed to be. He actually had thousands of people following him, and he provided jobs for them, the various businesses. And they turned over all their money for him, or else they worked for him for nothing, and he provided for their basic needs. He probably created quite a bit of wealth in the process. He died quite a long time ago. This is the mansion they lived in. This is the hotel, the Divine Lorraine Hotel in downtown Philadelphia. It's in a state of disrepair today. That is actually still not the Divine Lorraine Hotel, but there are still about 50 followers of this guy, even though the commune itself is, well, there are about 50 of them left, interestingly enough. They claim to be celibate, so it probably won't be long. In the early history of our country, Jamestown and Plymouth Colony both featured prominently, and I won't go into those because you know the history. The Labadie Tract in northern Maryland started in 1684, where Utopians came from the Netherlands, and they were under the direction of a guy by the name of Peter Sluiter, and they couldn't get along together. The food was terrible, and they were supposed to be celibate, all except for maybe Peter Sluiter. He made rules that didn't apply to himself, and they finally broke up about 14 years later, and there's not much left except some very fertile ground. In 1694, a fellow by the name of Johannes Kelpius developed the idea that the 3.5 years of the woman in the wilderness of Revelation was supposed to expire that fall, and that the Messiah was supposed to come. Johannes Kelpius was an astrologer, he was an alchemist, he was a follower of Lutheran pietism and Jacob Boehm, and probably a Rosicrucian. He and his followers came to the present-day Philadelphia along the banks of the Wissahickon River. And here they developed their mystical society. Here, it says Hermit Street here, and they were hermits. And they also failed about 14 years later, pretty much, when Kelpius died as still a young man. Well, there was one young man who really wanted to join this group, and he came from the old country. He was being persecuted. He was a Lutheran pietist, a follower of Jacob Boehm as well. He was being persecuted for his heterodox beliefs. And so he wanted to join this group, but by the time he got here, Kelpius had died. The place was pretty much abandoned. And so he went around different parts of Pennsylvania. He sort of became a Seventh-day Baptist because he believed in baptism by immersion, and also kept the seventh day. He had a spiritualist component, mystical component, and certainly interested in celibacy. It's still not entirely clear whether he himself was celibate. He certainly was not earlier in life. At any rate, he ultimately made his way to Ephrata, Pennsylvania. You can visit this place today. There are a number of buildings and a number of interesting tours that you can take. This one failed, however, about 30 or 40 years later. Interestingly enough, these people lived very austere lives. They even slept on blocks of wood as pillows. They got up in the middle of the night to spend an hour in devotions. They were hardworking, actually, and they developed a measure of economic success for a while, and they were selling products and so forth. The Eckerling brothers got involved with selling, and they were starting to prosper, until finally they decided, no, we can't do this, we can't prosper. So they got rid of the Eckerling brothers, and they went back to their very primitive ways. Their Bible is still open to the book of Daniel. But you can tour this place today. This is Father George Rapp. George Rapp was a Lutheran pietist as well, a follower of Jacob Boehme, a Rosicrucian, an alchemist, and he and his followers, several hundred of them, came to a place just north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called Harmony in 1805. And they were there for a few years, and they decided they wanted to go to Indiana. So they took up stakes and moved to, and they built a little town in New Harmony, Indiana. And you can see different structures in New Harmony and Harmony, as well as Economy, Pennsylvania, where they ultimately went back to. And here is a picture in one of their buildings of the goddess Sophia. I don't know how that enters into his Christianity, but nevertheless, you can tour these places today, and they're very enlightening, actually. In 1824, they decided to move back from Harmony, New Harmony, Indiana, back to Pennsylvania, and they sold their city, the whole thing, to this guy, Robert Dale Owen, who was a very wealthy Scottish industrialist who'd made a lot of money, and he was a humanist atheist, and he really, I believe, wanted to do what was good for people. He wanted to give them better educations. He wanted to give people, the common person, something better in life. Nevertheless, he was an autocrat like all the rest of these guys were, and his community promptly failed within a few years. Not only that, his satellite communities failed. The whole thing failed. They all fail, as you know. Going back to George Rapp, in 1829, September 15 of 1829, Father George Rapp went to the Bible, and he found in the book of Revelation the woman in the wilderness and the 3.5 times, and he made an announcement that that time was about to expire and the Messiah would be coming. Well, this is Bernard Muller, and about that same time he wrote a letter to George Rapp, and he styled himself as the Lion of Judah, or Count de Leon, which in Spanish is of Judah, of the lion. And I guess he figured that if George Rapp needed a Messiah, he was here. So he came to the Harmonist community and Economy, and after a while they decided that maybe this wasn't the Messiah they were looking for. But by that time, he drew off about 1/3 of the colonists. Well, George Rapp ended up quoting Revelation again, saying that the dragon drew off 1/3 of the stars. Well, this guy, Bernard Muller, the Count de Leon, went off to start his own commune with his followers that he absconded with. That failed. After he died, his wife went down here to Germantown, Louisiana, and this is what's left of that. Not very much. These people, when they failed, they went to Dr. Kyle's commune in Bethel, which, of course, you know what happened to that one, too. Yeah, it failed. Going up to the burned-over district in the western part of New York, we come to the village of Brockton, which is right on Lake Erie. And here we find a commune that was developed in the middle part of the 1800s, and this is the guy who started it, Thomas Lake Harris, who started life as a Baptist minister, became a Unitarian minister, influenced by Swedenborg, and ultimately became a spiritualist. He started a community in Mountain Cove, West Virginia. It failed. Went on to Armenia, New York. It failed. Brockton failed as well. He ultimately made his way out to California, Santa Rosa, and that one failed as well. He held that God was bisexual. He also had the idea that there were a lot of fairies in the world, and they lived in women's breasts, and that they produced wonderful music that was inaudible to human ears. Well, this is the commandery in Santa Rosa, California. This is what's left of it, not very much. Job Harriman actually ran for vice president of the United States in 1900 with Eugene Debs, who ran as president, and Eugene Debs already had behind him a couple, maybe 1 or 2 utopian failed communities in Washington State. And Harriman also had failed in his bid to become mayor of Los Angeles. He was a politician, a seminarian, and a lawyer, and he aspired to great things in life, and he wanted to start a utopian commune that he could use as a showplace for the United States and for the world. And so he went out to Llano del Rio in 1914, and he started this place. And Llano del Rio, after about 4 years, they left. They actually had about 1,400 maybe people at this place for just a short period of time, but in 1918, they all left. And those diehard colonists actually went to Louisiana, where they started New Llano. And these places always fail, and they get reformed, and they fail too. New Llano actually lasted for about 2 decades. But anyway, amongst these ruins, a number of years later, could be found this guy, Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. Aldous Huxley also had an interest in psychoactive drugs, and that's why this guy came to see him in those ruins. And this is Houston Smith. His parents were Methodist missionaries, and he developed an interest in world religions, wrote some big books on the subject. But he also had a big interest in psychoactive drugs, and that's why he came to see Aldous Huxley. This guy also came to see Aldous Huxley, Dr. Timothy Leary. And Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert both experimented with utopian communes in Boston as well as New York State. In Cahuilla, California, these people had a very novel way of developing their commune. They just filed adjacent land grants, 45 of the colonists did, and they just settled on this land right amongst the sequoias. They tore down trees and built roads. This is the biggest tree in the world. This is the Karl Marx tree, according to them, but today it's known as the General Sherman tree. Well, their land grants were declared to be invalid by the U.S. government, and they had to leave, and they were very saddened to see the name of their tree revert back. This is Jacob Bile. He was born in eastern Ohio, a place called Lisbon. He ultimately went to Kansas, married an Adventist girl, went on to California and became an Adventist minister, went back to Kansas, decided he wanted to go into nursing instead. So he goes up to Battle Creek and gets associated with C.W. Post and helped develop Post's cereal. But also he got involved with spiritualism and divine mind and mind cure and Christian Science and a few other things. And he ultimately came back to where he was born in Lisbon, Ohio, and developed a free love utopian commune. And about that time, his wife announced that their children were actually sired by C.W. Post, so that was the end of that marriage. But the utopian commune lasted a little longer until they finally disbanded and went up here to Worcester Lake, Illinois, where they built this huge house. And this is where he died as a young man. And then the rest of them went on back to California, SoCal, California, where it lasted another 20 years. Well, in the suburbs of Buffalo, did I tell you that this is the burned over district? I told you that. Okay, good. Well, the Inspirationists held that, that certain ones of their community were inspired and obtained divine revelations. And Christian Metz was the leader of this group called the Inspirationists. They came to suburbs of Buffalo in the mid-1800s and settled here at what they called Ebenezer. And they ultimately decided that that wasn't suitable for them, so they went on to Amana, Iowa. And this is Amana, Iowa, and you recognize that name because they are still producing a lot of things, a lot of appliances. But the utopianism failed. It failed in 1934. They couldn't get along together. They weren't working. They were hiring other people to do their work. And one of the foremen said that it took 5 or 6 utopians to do the work that 3 of the hired hands did. That's synecurism. This is a place in New York, Jemima Wilkinson's place. She developed a bunch of followers, and they lived in this big house. She ran around on a white horse. She claimed that she had died and gone to heaven and was resurrected. And now we get to Oneida, New York, and this is where John Humphrey Noyes started his utopian community. He had gone to Yale Divinity School, and he rejected the idea of the total depravity of man that John Calvin had advocated. And he taught that at the time of conversion, one became perfect. And so he called their group perfectionists. Another name was Bible communists. And so they shared everything. They even shared spouses. So if you wanted to join this community, you were actually married to the whole group. And you can visit it today. It's a lovely place. They, of course, are known for making silverware. But they had some very interesting and unique ideas as far as how they would run their commune. They couldn't have sexual relations with whoever they wanted. They had to go through a committee. And they couldn't even procreate when or with whom they wanted. That had to go through a committee too. They practiced something called stirpiculture, which is really eugenics. And they claim that they didn't have very many unwanted pregnancies. And the reason for that probably was that, that they generally paired the partners up with spiritual advancement levels. So the older ones were generally the more spiritually advanced, the younger ones were not so spiritually advanced. And so the older men were paired up with the younger women, the younger girls, and the vice versa, and the postmenopausal women with the younger men. And so maybe that's a large reason why they were successful, at least they claimed to be successful. There were some aberrations, however. But wait a minute. If they were perfect at the time of conversion, how could they be more perfect later? Well, that doesn't make sense. But John Humphrey Noyes wasn't under any obligation to make sense. The other thing that they practiced was criticism, mutual criticism. So they'd put one of their members on a hot seat, and everybody would criticize him or her. And so that was mutual criticism. But wait a minute, why did they need criticism if they were already perfect? Well, interestingly enough, John Humphrey Noyes ultimately got scared because John Tyner came from a free love community in Berlin Heights, Ohio, and he wasn't used to all these regulations and rules as far as who you could go to bed with and all that. So he was voicing his ideas that maybe what John Humphrey Noyes was doing was illegal with all these young girls, and John Humphrey Noyes decided that he could have some real criminal problems, so he fled to Canada where he lived the rest of his life and tried to run this outfit from Canada before it met its demise. Interestingly enough, John Humphrey Noyes' cousin was the President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes. His own father was a U.S. congressman. You can tour this place today, but here's Sewell New House. And Sewell New House is probably the main reason, probably the only reason, why this place survived 32 years, as strange as this place was. And he developed animal traps. And if he had lived in a non-utopian community, if he had been involved in the free market, he'd have made truckloads of money. And no, but he was a utopian. And when it finally dissolved, he suggested the idea that maybe because he was the one that had provided the wherewithal for them to survive all these years, that maybe he should get a little bit more than everybody else, because by that time they were prospering. At least their businesses were. But no, the rest of them outvoted him, and he had to settle for everything else that they did. Here is Leiden, Massachusetts, a very rural place. I suggest you don't go there. It's hard to get to. I even had to go on dirt roads to get there. William Dorrell and his followers, the Dorrellites, settled here in 1798. And he held that he was a sort of messiah figure and that he did not feel any pain. Well, that invites, of course, a test. And somebody did test. And they started beating the living daylights out of this guy until he finally admitted that he did have pain and that he had had enough. Thank you very much. And that was about the end of that community after they decided that he was no messiah after all. This is a place in New York that no longer exists. This is a very sad chapter in American history where during the 1930s, when the United States government, the White House, was occupied by a communist, they actually took taxpayer money to develop Jersey homesteads in New Jersey for Jewish workers in the factories. And this place failed within a couple of years, even with tax subsidies. This is Bishop Hill, Illinois, and a fellow by the name of Eric Jansen came here with his followers, several hundred of them, from Sweden. And they lived here for a number of years. They had been persecuted in the old country. They were Lutheran pietists, essentially, and teaching very heterodox views. And they actually narrowly escaped with their lives from Sweden and came here, and they developed this commune. They struggled for a while. A few buildings are still struggling. Some of them have been renovated. You can visit this place today. This was Eric Jansen's house. Eric Jansen actually was shot to death at the courthouse a few years after he started this community by the husband of one of his relatives. And so that ended Eric Jansen's life, but the community struggled on for a few years until finally they disbanded, and instead of going into Lutheranism, they actually became Methodist and Seventh-day Adventist both. In 1971, some hippies from California decided to come to this place in Tennessee, Crosstown, I believe it's Crosstown, Tennessee, Summertown, Tennessee, where initially they had been, actually they used marijuana as a sacrament. Initially, they were sharing communal beds and all kinds of strange things. At the height of their commune here in Summertown, Tennessee, they had about 1,300 or 1,400 people in the early 1980s. But actually, it's still there. You can go visit it today. They're vegans, and they have all kinds of strange things. If you go in here, be careful. There's some odor. I mean, they have all kinds of herbs and stuff that you have to be careful of. But you can tour this place today. Today, it's not a utopian commune. That failed in 1983. They went into debt. The only way out was to convert it to a free market entity. And today they have many nonprofit organizations, which suggests to me that there might be a touch of subsidy here. I'm not sure about that. But they have an interesting way of recycling their old vehicles. Here's their bookstore. I don't think they read very much. This is another failed commune, Rugby, Tennessee, and it failed. This is Etienne Cabet. He's the other Frenchman that we need to talk about. He, in the 1840s, decided that he was going to give his hand a try, and he came to Texas. He had published a book called Voyage to Icaria, so he and his followers known as the Icarians. And so they came to present-day Denton, Texas, where they had bought about 1 million acres. They found that that didn't work out too well, and by 1847, they had heard that Joseph Smith had been murdered here at the Carthage jail in Illinois, and that the Mormons had left. And here is their community in Nauvoo, Illinois, right on the banks of the Mississippi River. And this is Joseph Smith's house. So they bought the whole village and came up here and lived for a while, but of course Etienne Cabet was very autocratic like everybody else. He was spying on the people, and he was telling them what to do, and they got tired of it, and they kicked him out. And some of his diehard loyalists left with him, and they floated down the Mississippi River until they got to St. Louis, where Etienne Cabet stroked out after all of that and died. And those who were with him started their own little commune and struggled for a while until they finally gave that up. Meanwhile, back at Nauvoo, they struggled on and finally went to Corning, Iowa after they left this place. They failed at Corning as well. And then they ultimately went to Icaria Speranza in Sonoma Valley, California. And Speranza means hope. Well, yeah, there's always hope, but this one failed in 1986. No utopian tour is complete without a trip to the great People's Republic of Wisconsin. And here is the building through which a lot of the goods and services are being dispersed from this building. It's a big drain on their goods there, their budget. And interestingly enough, if people don't like what they're getting, they go around and they go on hunger strikes. It looks like this guy probably could go a little farther. He says he's on day 49 of a hunger strike, but I think he'd go a little farther. But anyway, he's not happy with what he's getting. And here are other people with placards and different types. They're not too happy. Well, they come by it honestly, because you go up some of the rest of Wisconsin and you find failed communes. Here's one, Germania, Germania, Wisconsin, where more disappointed followers of William Miller came in around 1860. They lasted about 2 decades, and there's not much left, maybe a couple of old buildings. They failed very promptly. In Ripon, Wisconsin, you find there's not anything left really of the Fourierist community of Ceresco, which was named after the Greek goddess of wheat. This one actually was the only Fourierist commune that actually ended with a slight profit. All the rest of them were ended with a loss, but this one actually survived for 3 or 4 years with a slight profit. This is Father Ambrose Oshwald, who was a Catholic priest, and he was persecuted in the old country because of his unorthodox beliefs. And so he came to St. Nazianz, Wisconsin, and his commune failed there as well. But the utopians today in the People's Republic of Wisconsin really like their communal life. So here is one of their big buildings where they still live communally. And here's another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, another one, another one. And so that's still going on today, and they like that kind of lifestyle, which is okay with me as long as they leave everybody else alone. Here in Lake Geneva, there was another failed commune that was a Pentecostal nature. There's not anything left. A beautiful place, though. Here is a physician. His name is Dr. Cyrus Reed Teed, and the Hebrew for Cyrus is Koresh. And so he and his followers were known as Koreshinites. He was a physician. He had a vision or revelation that he was a Messiah. He actually functioned and operated this commune as a theocracy. He started in New York, went to Chicago, and then ultimately ended in 1904 in Estero, Florida. And he thought that the earth was hollow. And he developed this device called the rectilineator that proved that the earth was hollow. Needless to say, his commune failed in 1961 when it was converted into a state park. Here is another, sometimes these people like the name of Koresh. When I was a young man going to college, about an hour's drive away from Waco, the people from the Branch Davidians would come up and they would distribute their literature, which we would promptly throw in the trash. And that was long before this guy came around, and he traveled the world gaining adherents, and he considered himself to be a messianic figure, also using the name of Koresh. Unfortunately, with the help of the U.S. government, this thing went up in flames. And that was a sad event from a government standpoint. But you know, all of these things go up in flames. All of them figuratively go up in flames, but this one, both figuratively and literally, went up in flames. Well, back to the science of Karl Marx. His scientific, since he invoked science, we should look at it. There were actually two major countries, world powers, who did a controlled study to see whether Marxism would work or whether free markets would work. And both countries flourished for a few generations and did just fine. But finally, by 1989, the results were in. And the Berlin Wall came crumbling down, and there was no question but that Adam Smith's concept of the free markets had won. These communes are still being developed today. We're almost done, by the way. Here's one in Ohio. And so if I ask you to join one of these things, I don't think any of you would be interested in joining a pagan cult that follows an earth religion and some other strange concepts that they have here. Ancient society of I don't know what. But what got me interested was here they talk about subsidized housing, nonprofit housing, which makes me wonder, are these things really tax advantaged? And if they are, can they survive within a rigged economy? In other words, within a free market economy, these things all have to fail. But if you have tax advantages, is it possible that one of these things survives? I certainly wouldn't want to join this one, but this guy was Simon Kuznets. And he, during communist control of the White House in the 1930s, was delegated with the responsibility of developing what was called GDP, gross domestic product. And so gross domestic product, according to him, was the total value of goods and services provided and sold by the private sector, as well as the cost of goods that was provided by the public sector. Interestingly enough, today, we have a concept that was not provided by him called the GPP, the gross private product. And that excludes the public sector. Unfortunately, what we have is we have that needle that is increasingly going up in the public sector. So we have expenditures that are coming out of the public sector now that have no business being there, and we have a country that has an economy that is more and more rigged and controlled. And so when you have TARP funds and bailout funds that include things like $50 billion for electronic medical records and all kinds of money for all kinds of programs that are unconstitutional, where is all this going to end? Well, as that needle continues going up, if it gets to 100%, obviously you have a utopian commune. But even before it gets to 100%, you're going to have the makings of a utopian commune. And this is what you ultimately get, because as people want more and more, they're going to not be able to deny people, and they have an advantage over the private utopian communes in the sense that they have something called the printing press. And so they can go in and they can print all this money, and they can just keep adding zeros to it. And so I think this is what, unfortunately, we're looking for in the future, as these failed utopian communes nationally ultimately can't turn off the spigot, or they won't turn off the spigot, And this is what you end up with. Now, this leads me to Christman Utopia postulate number 2, and I'm not going to, our time is just about up, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but this basically says that is it possible that in a controlled market, a utopian communal experiment might survive if the sinecure force is less than the subsidized force? Okay, so you have two forces at work here. One is a sinecure force that is dragging it down because of loss of efficiency. The other is a subsidized force of the government. And if the subsidized force is greater than the sinecure force, the average of all the participants, is it possible? And I think it might be, but this is a theoretical. Okay. Now, to end here, and we need to come to a close, I'd like to point out the words of George Santayana, the famous Spanish philosopher, who said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." But interestingly enough, George Santayana also said this: "I like to walk about among the beautiful things that adorn the world, but private wealth I should decline, or any sort of personal possessions, because they would take away my liberty." Really? If George Santayana were alive today, I would urge him to go back and review his history. Thank you very much.